In the spring of 1981, 36-year-old Sue Sharp rented a small cabin in the remote resort town of Keddie, California. She moved into cabin 28 with her 5 children, seeking a quiet life tucked away in the woods. That peace shattered on the morning of April 12th. Sue's 14-year-old daughter Sheila was walking back home after spending the night at a neighbor's house. She opened her front door and stepped into a nightmare. The living room was covered in blood. Her mother Sue, her 15-year-old brother John, and his 17-year-old friend Dana Wingate were lying dead on the floor. They had been bound with medical tape and electrical cords, beaten with a hammer, and stabbed repeatedly. The physical force used in this attack was staggering. The attack was so violent that the steak knife had bent at a 90-degree angle. Violence on this scale requires massive exertion. It involves shouting, desperate struggling, and the heavy thud of weapons, noises that would typically be heard throughout an entire neighborhood. Yet remarkably, 3 young boys were asleep in a separate bedroom at the back of that very cabin. They were completely unharmed. Cabin 28's floor plan shows how tight the space was. The living room massacre occurred just feet from the boys' bedroom, separated only by thin walls. Unbelievably, the surviving boys claimed they slept through the attack. The noise would have easily penetrated those walls. This creates a physical contradiction, a scene defined by violent struggle occurring mere inches away from children who remained undisturbed. While the boys might have simply been deep sleepers, the layout suggests the attackers may have moved with a specific focus, perhaps even possessing enough familiarity with the cabin to keep the violence contained to the front room. But the boys weren't the only anomaly inside that cabin. When police scoured the scene, they realized 12-year-old Tina Sharp was missing. This sparked a massive 3-year kidnapping manhunt. In April 1984, a stranger in a remote forest found a partial human skull, confirmed as Tina's. The killer drove 29 miles from the cabin. Shortly after, an anonymous caller correctly identified her remains to the sheriff before police released any public information. This implies someone was tracking the investigation so closely that they possessed forensic details before the press did. This phantom caller showed that the killer, or an accomplice, remained active in the area and monitoring law enforcement 3 full years after the murders. Investigators had primary suspects living right next door in cabin 26, Martin Smart and Beau Bubiday. Smart was known for a severe temper, and he had a clear motive. He was reportedly furious with Sue Sharp because she was advising his wife to leave him. The evidence wasn't purely circumstantial. A bloody hammer matching the wounds of the victims was later found discarded in a pond near the cabins. Years later, a therapist revealed Smart explicitly confessed to the murders during a counseling session. Yet, despite a documented motive, a recovered murder weapon, and an explicit confession, police made 0 arrests. When this evidence fails to produce an arrest, suspicion shifts toward the local authorities. This brings us to a concept known as a suspect shield. This occurs when an investigation is intentionally bottlenecked to protect a specific individual. In Keddie, the initial crime scene was handled so poorly by local authorities that much of the physical evidence was lost or compromised. This negligence may be linked to a significant conflict of interest. Martin Smart reportedly had close personal ties to the local sheriff, who was actively overseeing the case. These personal connections suggest that the investigation may have been compromised from within, preventing the case from ever reaching a courtroom. The sleeping boys, the phantom caller, and the ignored confession all point toward a systemic failure. The perpetrators of the Keddie murders were not sophisticated criminals. They were local individuals who, for one reason or another, were never held accountable by the law. It highlights a unique vulnerability in small, isolated communities, where personal loyalty can sometimes override the pursuit of justice. The case remains officially unsolved, leaving behind an unsettling prospect that the truth of Cabin 28 was never out of reach. It was just never pursued.